So good, so good, so good.
Everything you want for summer is at Nordstrom Rack stores now, and up to 60% off. Stock up and save on the brands you love like Vince, Sam Edelman, Frame, and Free People. Join the Nordy Club to unlock exclusive discounts, shop new arrivals first, and more. Plus, buy online and pick up at your favorite Rack store for free. Great brands, great prices. That's why you Rack.
This morning I made a profound and heavy realization. When you've been surrounded by loss and decline for so long, the desire to see someone actually get better isn't just about the situation. It's about needing proof that things can still go the other way. I've been living in a cycle where the ending is always the same, and it's exhausting to carry that expectation into every new room.
You're listening to Unbound Off Script. Today, Beth Curry is stepping away from the noise to talk about the things that carry weight. Whether it's a personal reflection or a response to the heavy things you've shared with her, this is a space for the raw and the real.
Hey everybody, I'm Beth Curry. Welcome back to Unbound. This is an off-script episode. Calling this one The Weight of Waiting. Somewhere in the tagline, I've said, on accumulation, the frozen place, and a very shiny heart. I don't know. Before I get into it, I think I want to address something because some of you are probably already doing the math. A few episodes ago, I dropped the architecture of peace. It was the episode about what I actually did with my mess, right? The forgiveness and the nervous system work and the awe and the whole thing, right? It landed really well. It was in the top 5 most listened to episodes this show has put out, which genuinely meant a lot to me. It always does. A lot of you reached out. A lot of you shared it. And it even got some recognition I wasn't expecting, which I'm just going to mention quietly and move on from because I'm Canadian and we don't do that. So I get it if you're sitting there right now thinking, wait, didn't she just say she found peace? Didn't she talk about awe and gold and all the, nervous system stuff and forgiveness and all of that? And now she's opening with something heavy she realized this morning. What happened? Nothing happened, I promise. Here's the thing I said in that episode that I meant completely. Peace is not a place you arrive at and stay. It's something you return to over and over. You get knocked out of it, and then you find your way back, and the path gets more familiar, and the distance back gets shorter. This episode, I think, is what it looks like when you're making your way back. I'm not a hypocrite, okay? Or at least not about this. I'm a person, and persons have seasons, right? And right now, I'm in one that is heavy. And I think some of you are too. And I think it matters more to be honest about that than to protect the version of me that already found the peace and kind of just leave it there like a finished thing, right? It's not a finished thing. Neither am I. So that's where we are. I'm going to get into it. So there's a concept in grief work called cumulative grief. I've talked about this before. I'll probably use those words several times today. It sounds clinical because it is clinical, but it's describing something very human, like a grief that piles up, obviously, right? It's not a complicated thing to understand when you hear cumulative grief. Loss on top of loss before the previous one is even close to processed. And the reason it matters, the reason it's its own specific category of awful is that grief is not designed to stack, right? Your nervous system, your actual biological one, like we're talking about real physiology here, not a metaphor at all. Your nervous system is built to process loss in a sequence. So something happens and you respond and you metabolize it over time. You slowly, unglamorously reorganize your life around the absence. Researchers call this finding a new normal, right? It's a phrase that I've hated since 2020, but that's for a whole different reason. But I find in this context, this phrase mildly offensive, but also accurate. Okay, so here we are. The thing is that the whole process takes time. It takes energy. It uses up real resources. And when losses arrive faster than you can process them, or when one loss is so enormous and so ongoing that it never actually closes, your nervous system starts doing something different. It stops processing and it starts storing. So think of it like a kitchen with a broken dishwasher. Okay. For the first few days, you wash the dishes by hand. Fine, a little annoying, you manage, whatever. But then more dishes come and you're tired and the pile starts building, and eventually you're cooking on one burner because the other three are completely buried, and you're eating standing up because the table's covered and someone wanders in and asks why you look so overwhelmed. And you say it's just dishes because technically it's just dishes, right? Except it's not just dishes. It never was. You know what I mean? And here's the other part that doesn't get talked about by, I don't think, anyone. It's not just that the losses pile up. It's that there's no time between them to actually heal. So if you think about a physical wound, a real one, an actual wound, your body needs time to close it, form new tissue, rebuild. And if something keeps hitting that exact same spot before it's done, it can't heal, right? The wound stays open and sometimes it gets deeper. And that's what this kind of grief does. I have wounds that have never fully closed because the next thing showed up before the last thing finished. I have a whole ass collection of open wounds, some of them years old, that just keep getting poked. Not because the universe has it out for me, though I mean some days the evidence is not great, but because the loss doesn't consult your recovery timeline before it shows up, right? So I sent my husband a text the other day, and it wasn't eloquent, it wasn't measured. It was just honest on a bad day. The kind of honest you only get to at the end of a very long day when you've stopped performing okay and you're just kind of sitting there in the dark being real with the person who signed up to love you through all of it. Bless him. I'm just going to share a couple of parts of it with you. So I said, I've been drowning in 3 years of sorrows, so sometimes I forget the small blessings. I've been in a state of high alert survival for so long that normal feels suspicious and blessings feel too small to count against the weight of everything. And then there was the second part about my mom. I said, and then there's the part about just waiting on my mom, and I don't know how to handle that because I'm stuck. I feel stuck. This is why I need to feel progress everywhere else, but I can't feel progress. I sent that in a longer text, poor guy. And then I sat there and I looked at it for a minute and I thought, yeah, that's where I am right now. That's exactly where I am. That realization that I had this morning, that's where it lives. That's what it looks like written down on a bad day to the person who has to love you through it. Quick nervous system primer, because I think you need to understand the machinery before we get into what happens when it breaks down. You have an autonomic nervous system, okay? It runs in the background like your phone's operating system, kind of, right? You never think about it. It just kind of handles things. Heartbeat, digestion, immune response, all those things. And it has two main modes. You have the sympathetic nervous system. That's your gas pedal, okay? Fight, flight, freeze. Your heart rate spikes, your cortisol floods in, blood rushes to your muscles, and your prefrontal cortex. That's the rational, thoughtful, emotionally regulated part of your brain. Goes partially offline, right? It just kind of checks out. Because when you're running from something, you don't need to deliberate. You need to move. You need to get the fuck out of there. Then there's the parasympathetic nervous system. That's your break. That's rest, digest, and restore, right? Heart rate comes down, your cortisol drops, your prefrontal cortex comes back online, and you can actually think again. You can feel things again. You can process something for once. In life, these are supposed to alternate. Gas, break, gas, break. That's healthy. That's regulated, and that's what functioning like a normal human being looks like. But imagine the gas pedal gets stuck. Not because you're dramatic. I'm very, very familiar with the term downy drama. I can admit to being dramatic a lot. But in this case, it's not because I'm dramatic. It's not because I'm weak or broken or not trying hard enough. But it's because the thing that the nervous system has filed under threat hasn't gone away. It's still there. It's still real. And so the alarm just kind of stays on. Make sense? So that's chronic stress. That's prolonged grief. That's what, for me, 2.5 years of survival mode feels like from the inside. And when you live in that activated state long enough, your baseline kind of recalibrates, right? Things that wouldn't have registered as dangerous before now register as dangerous because your system has decided that high alert is the new normal, and anything that isn't a damn crisis starts to feel suspicious, which is, as I told my husband in that text, exactly what it feels like. Normal feels suspicious, and blessings feel too small to count against the weight of everything. I didn't make it up. I just lived it long enough to finally be able to name it. So if you've been a follower for any period of time, if you're a friend of mine, whatever, my mother has dementia. You know this. For everyone else, my mother has dementia. Now you know this. She's alive. She's physically present. She's in a body I recognize. And she's also, in the ways that made her, not really here anymore. There's a researcher named Pauline Boss who spent decades studying something she called ambiguous loss. I've also talked about this before. She found two types. So the first is when someone is physically gone, but psychologically still present. Families of missing soldiers, people whose loved ones have disappeared, gone, but not confirmed gone. You can't close the loop. And the second type is when someone is physically present, but psychologically absent. Dementia. Maybe severe addiction or a traumatic brain injury. The person is there. You can see them, you can touch them, you can sit with them, but they're also, in the ways that matter the most, not there anymore. Boss's argument, and honestly, mine too, is that the second type is in some ways harder to grieve than death. Because with a death, there's a moment, right? A ritual. There's a before and an after. People bring food. They acknowledge that something ended. They sit with you and they let it be real. But with ambiguous loss, none of that. No moment, no ritual, just this slow, incremental disappearing while the world keeps going and nobody brings you a casserole and you're expected to keep functioning because technically she's still here. Technically. And the part that I really struggle with, I have friends who have lost their mothers, like really lost them permanently, with a funeral and a date and a clear before and after. And there are moments in these friendships where I feel like a complete fraud. Like I don't have the right to grieve my mother's disappearance when she's still breathing. Like my grief is lesser. Like I'm borrowing something that isn't mine yet and I should probably put it back. I know intellectually that's not true. Grief doesn't have a legitimacy tribunal. My forensics brain has read the papers. My clinical brain has done the math. I know. But my heart, which did not read the papers and frankly seems pretty resistant to the math, feels like a fraud. And so sometimes I just go quiet. I hold their grief and I don't mention mine because mine feels premature. And then I go home and I feel more alone than when I arrived. Like there's times that I don't have my mom. Like when I want to call her, when I'm having an awful day and I know that I've burdened everyone else too much, I knew my mom was always there for me and I can't do that anymore. I can't call and tell her good news and I can't call her for advice and things like that. I've lost my mother in the ways that to me matter the most. This ambiguous loss, the one without the funeral and without the casserole and without anyone saying, yes, this is a real thing that's actually happening to you. It's invisible in a way that other losses aren't. And invisible grief has a way of making you feel invisible too. I'm still working on that one. I want to be real with you about like what the last 2.5 years have actually looked like. Not for sympathy, okay, but just for context, I think. Because I think a lot of people are carrying something like this and I don't know, I think they're calling it something similar. And I want to name it in, an actual full size whatever, okay? In the last 2.5 years, I've been grieving my father's death. I've been processing and publicly sharing some of the hardest things I've ever lived through. My trauma, my abuse history, the death of my son, the loss of that relationship and everything tangled up in it, which, hurts in its own way. The loss of self that you thought that you were before you finally named what happened to you, right? I'm watching my mother disappear incrementally. There's no timeline. There's no prognosis pointing anywhere good. There's no endpoint I can organize anything around. I've also lost 2 other family pets and my mother-in-law. And then 3 weeks ago, of course, y'all know, Trixie, my other cat. She was old. Well, old. I don't know. What's old anyway for a cat? I see cats live into their 20s. I don't know. She was 15 and a half She was a constant for me in a season where almost nothing was constant. And yeah, just a cat is a phrase for some, some people to reach for. And those people and I are going to have to agree to disagree, because Trixie was not just a cat. She was a witness. She was one of the things that didn't change when everything else did. I've had her since she was born in 2010, had her since 2011. And I've gone through a lot of life and a lot of life changes and a lot of change in those 15 years. And she was always there with me for it. And now she's gone. And now Micah is struggling. Micah was with us 2 weeks before Trixie came. So Micah saw Trixie through her entire life here. Micah's my soul cat. I've had her just as long, and she's old and she's been worrying me sick. And we just brought home a new baby, Parks. One I honestly believe Trixie sent, because that's the kind of thing Trixie would do. And I feel simultaneously guilty about the new life and terrified about losing another one, and completely exhausted by how much I love things that can leave. That's the accumulation, that's what it looks like laid out flat. It's a lot. It's been a lot. And the reason I'm laying it out like a crime scene, which for the record, I'm professionally qualified to do, is because your nervous system does not file these things separately. There's no tidy folder for grief about mom sitting next to a different folder for grief about the cat, and another one for the self I've been slowly excavating in therapy. There's one folder. It's called threat, and everything goes in there. There's no exceptions. There's no organizational system, just threat. So when Micah stopped eating and withdrew and threw up last week, pink liquid, violently, the way Trixie had the day before she died, my body did not calmly assess the situation. My body said, this is how it ends. This is exactly what the end looks like. I've seen this before. I know this. My brain knew better, right? I have this background. I know what bile looks like. I know what it means when a cat vomits on an empty stomach. I know it's not, in most cases, a death sentence. My nervous system did not give a shit what my brain knew. My nervous system had learned 3 weeks prior on a white table at the vet's office that pink liquid means I'm about to lose something I love. So it responded to Micah accordingly. Heart rate up, cortisol spike, hands not quite steady, and the thought of arriving not as a thought, but as a fact, as a certainty, this is how it ends. And here's the thing, that's conditioning. It's not me being irrational at all. There is a really significant difference between those two things. And I want to make sure that lands, because I spent a lot of time thinking I was just falling apart when actually my nervous system was doing exactly what a nervous system does. It learned a pattern, it recognized the pattern, it reacted before my brain finished its first sentence. Make sense? It's called a trauma-primed threat response. And the gap that it creates between what you know and what you feel, that terrible two places at once split, one of the loneliest places a person can stand. And it's not a personal failure. It's not evidence that you're broken or weak or healing wrong. Your body's healing on its own timeline, in its own language. And that language is not always one that the mind can translate quickly. The mind just has to wait. So when I feel truly deeply stuck, which I have been for months, I get this urgent, almost frantic need to feel progress somewhere, anywhere. I will reorganize the cabinet. I'll make a list. I'll start something new. I'll pursue a goal with an intensity that probably looks like ambition from the outside, but it's much closer to desperation. You want to see someone reorganize a pantry with alarming focus? Find someone who has one enormous, immovable thing in their life. I will be there 15 minutes later with a label maker and probably a Rubbermaid bin. Because one enormous thing in my life cannot move, and that's my mother's dementia. It's not going to get better. There's no treatment that reverses it. There is no chapter where things improve, only chapters where things are managed, and then chapters where they aren't. And then an ending I'm not going to describe right now because I'm just not ready. The story moves in one direction. It doesn't pause while I catch my breath. It doesn't care that I'm already carrying everything else. And because that one enormous thing can't move, my nervous system goes hunting for movement everywhere else, which is actually adaptive. It's your system trying to maintain some sense of agency when the biggest thing is completely out of your control, right? Your brain is not stupid. It's doing its best with a terrible situation, but it doesn't work. The cabinet gets reorganized, the list gets made, the big thing is still there, still immovable, still defining the edges of everything. The relief lasts about as long as it takes to close the cabinet door. And then you're back in the frozen place. I want to stay here for a minute in the frozen place because I don't think I've ever really described what this actually looks like from the inside. And I think some of you need to hear it named because you might be living in it right now and calling it something else, or you might be looking at me and not realizing what the fuck I'm going through. So, waiting on my mom, the specific, particular, grinding kind of waiting that dementia caregiving requires, does something to your daily life that is hard to explain to people who haven't experienced it. It's not dramatic. It's not. Like, that's the thing. It's not the kind of hard that gets acknowledged because from the outside, nothing is happening. She's stable. She's cared for. Everything is fine. But you are always, always on. There's like this background hum of alert that runs underneath every damn thing, every day, every ordinary Tuesday. You're making dinner, it's there. You're in a meeting and it's there. You wake up at 3 a.m. and it's loudly there, running through scenarios you didn't ask to think about. You don't know what you're going to walk into when you visit. You don't know if today is a good day or a hard day until you're in it. You don't know how long this phase lasts or what the next phase looks like, or when the phone is going to ring with information that changes everything. You just don't know. And you live in that not knowing continuously with no end date and no prognosis that points anywhere hopeful and no one who can tell you what to expect next. That realization I had this morning, needing proof that things can still go the other way, that's where it comes from. When every story in your life has been trending in one friggin' direction for long enough, your nervous system stops expecting anything different. That, my friends, is not pessimism. It's just pattern recognition. And it's really messing me up. And it follows you everywhere you go. Every new situation, every new relationship or pet or hope that arrives, that background question running underneath all of it, how does this one end? That not knowing does something to your nervous system. And I think what it does is genuinely underappreciated in conversations about caregiver stress. Like, it's not just the tasks, like the calls, the coordination, the visits, the decisions. It's the ambient uncertainty, right? It's the way that your body stays slightly braced all the livelong day for something you cannot predict and cannot prevent, right? That's a physiological state. And it costs something real. And it costs it every day in small, invisible withdrawals until one day you, I don't know, look and realize that your account is pretty much empty and you're not entirely sure how the hell that happened. And what makes it lonelier still is that none of it is visible. You know, there's no cast on your arm and there's no obvious reason for the exhaustion. You can't point to a specific bad thing that happened today because today nothing happened. Today was just another day of not knowing. It was just another day of the background hum or managing and showing up and doing the next thing while carrying the full weight of an ending that's coming and will not be rushed and cannot be stopped. Nobody brings you a casserole for a Thursday night. And the anticipatory grief, that grief that you do in advance for someone who's still alive, this is a thing I don't think the world has very good language for yet. You're grieving the future. You're grieving the conversations you won't get to have and the version of her that's already long gone and the version of yourself that existed before this became your reality. You know, you're doing all of that grief work in real time while also showing up and managing and making sure she's okay, which means that the grief almost never gets your full attention. You know, it happens in the margins, in the car at 3 a.m., like I said, in the middle of a perfectly ordinary day when something small reminds you of who she was and you feel the weight of it for like 45 seconds before you have to move on to the next thing. This is what stuck feels like, you know, not frozen in that dramatic sense, just kind of caught, like caught in a net or something, you know, between what is and what's coming, between grief and function, between, I don't know, a loss that hasn't finished yet and a life that keeps needing to be lived. What I've slowly and probably pretty reluctantly come to understand is that the frozen place is just information. You know, I've talked a lot about that, about these signs and feelings that your body gives you. It's just data, it's information. In this case, it's my nervous system saying there's a grief here that hasn't been given its full weight. You know, there's something you keep trying to manage instead of actually mourn. Dementia doesn't get mourned, it gets managed, right? Every day you make calls, you navigate systems, you show up, you manage. And somewhere in all of that managing, mourning doesn't just happen, because how the hell do you mourn something that isn't finished yet? There's no template for that. Nobody covered that in any class I took. No support groups, nothing. I don't have a good answer for this, but I think naming it out loud, I'm grieving something that has no endpoint and no ritual and no casserole. And I genuinely do not know how to do this is more honest than the managing. And honest is, I think, I've said before, kind of where the healing starts, right? Even when the healing is a very, very long road with broken GPS. Every time there's a loss in my life, and there have been a few, as we've established, I say the same thing out loud with my whole chest, and I mean every word of it. I cannot take another one. I'm done. I have nothing left. I cannot survive this, and I mean it. There's no performance in it. There's no hidden reserve I'm secretly drawing on. There's no quiet voice in the back of my head saying, you'll be fine. In that moment, I genuinely, completely believe I have hit the absolute end of what I can hold, and then another one comes. And I say it again, and I get through it. I have said I cannot take another one more times than I can count in the last 2.5 years, and I have not been wrong. No, I have been wrong, actually, every single time. Sorry. Not because I was secretly stronger than I thought. Maybe that a little, I'll take it. I don't know. But because the human capacity to survive the things we are absolutely certain will destroy us is one of the most poorly advertised facts about being alive. We survive things. We say things we can't. And we say we can't survive things. And then we do. And I'm not talking about the inspirational poster version of this. I'm not talking about bouncing back or rising up in any of that stupid language we used to make grief look heroic and clean. I'm talking about the quiet, unglamorous, completely unremarkable fact that you got through the last one, and the one before that, and the one before that. You said you couldn't, and then you did. I don't think we give ourselves nearly enough credit for that because it doesn't look like strength from the outside. From the outside, it looks like someone who just keeps getting knocked down. But from the inside, from where you're actually standing, it is the ongoing daily, sometimes hourly decision to keep going again. Even when you meant it, when you said you couldn't. And that's real and that counts. Even when it doesn't feel like anything except barely surviving. So there's this guy I know. I've talked about him before. Maybe once or twice. I don't know. His name is Nate. So he's been in my life for over 36 years. Sorry. He's walked through more of it with me than almost anyone else on the planet. And he gave me a word after losing our son in the middle of one of the greatest griefs of my life, when I didn't have language for any of it. He gave me this. Kintsukuroi. So it's Japanese. It means to repair with gold. The practice, when a piece of pottery breaks, instead of throwing it out or hiding the damage, you repair it with lacquer mixed with gold or silver, and you make the cracks visible. You trace every single break in precious metal, and what you end up with is something that couldn't have existed without the breaking, something more beautiful because of its history, not in spite of what happened to it, but because of it. And he gave me that after losing our son, and I've carried it through every crack since. On the inside, not on the outside. So my dad, my mom's slow disappearing, the trauma I finally named out loud, the losses I blamed myself for decades, Trixie 3 weeks ago on a white table, every single break, I've been filling cracks with gold for a long time. And these are the cracks in my heart. Every time my heart breaks, I fill it in. And I want to tell you something I realized recently, right in the middle of all this, in that frozen place, saying once again that I can't take another one. I have a very shiny heart right now. Not in spite of everything, but because of it. Every crack filled, every break made visible and repaired and carried forward. Every loss I said would end me, that I got through anyway. Gold. That's kintsukuroi, and that's what resilience actually looks like. When you stop waiting for it to look like wholeness, when you stop expecting to come through things unchanged and start noticing what you became instead. Something I say almost every day that's completely true and somehow still makes me feel worse. I have so much to be grateful for. I do. Genuinely, I have a husband who receives my texts at whatever hour and loves me through the weight of them without making me feel like a burden, which for the record is not nothing. And I have this work that actually matters to me. I have a home and a life and people in it, and friends, especially one, who show up in ways I don't always know how to receive gracefully. But by almost any external measure, I have a lot going for me. I really do. And I still struggle regularly, sometimes daily. Struggle is real. It affects my life and it does not cancel out the gratitude, and the gratitude does not cancel out the struggle. And somehow, the coexistence of those two things is the loneliest part of all of this. The cultural script says that they should cancel each other out, right? Count your blessings, look on the bright side, choose joy. And when you're someone who genuinely wants to do those things, who is not by nature a pessimist, though, I don't know, maybe I kind of am, someone who truly does not want to live inside the weight of all of it, the gap between what you want to feel and what you actually feel kind of starts to feel like a failure itself. Like you're doing gratitude wrong. Or like you should have this more figured out by now. I talk about the good things openly here. I name the blessings. And then I close the laptop and the weight settles back in and I wonder if I'm a hypocrite or if I'm just a person, And I think what I've landed on is another phrase that I say often, so often that it annoys the hell out of me now. Both things are true at the same time. And they're not fighting each other. The gratitude is real and the struggle is real. And you can hold both without one erasing the other. You can be genuinely thankful for your life and also find it very hard. And you can count every blessing and still feel like they don't quite balance the scale. You can mean every good thing you say and still cry in your car on the way home. It's not hypocrisy, it's just the full spectrum of being human, which nobody warned us about adequately, in my opinion. The problem isn't that gratitude and struggle coexist. The problem is when you start using gratitude as a weapon against yourself. When I have so much to be grateful for becomes the reason that you're not allowed to also be struggling. They can live in the same house and they don't have to take turns. I want to talk about the cats. Again, I am a crazy cat lady. If you know me well, you know this. All of them, though, the ones that I lost, the ones I'm worried about, the one who arrived in the middle of it. So Trixie died 3 weeks ago. She was old. She was blind. She relied completely on me. Medications, care, all of it, day in, day out. She had been with me through more than I have words for right now. And before I even caught my breath, Micah started struggling and we brought home a new baby who I genuinely believe Trixie sent because that tracks with who Trixie was as a cat. And I felt 3 things at the same time that have absolutely no business existing in the same chest at the same time: grief, terror, and guilt. Grief for Trixie, terror that Micah's struggling means I'm about to lose her too, and this low, persistent, completely unreasonable guilt about the kitten, about bringing new life in while I was still mid-morning. Like it was too soon, like I hadn't enjoyed joy yet, or earned joy. Like loving something new was this betrayal of what I lost. And also, if I'm being completely honest, the quiet fear that the kitten energy is too much for Micah and that I caused it, that I did this, that this is all my fault. And I know how that sounds. My brain's filed a full report. The report says this is not rational. I read the report, but underneath it is something I think is worth marinating in for a moment. I'm exhausted by how much I love things that can leave. And it's not just the cats. It's my mother leaving piece by piece and my dad already gone and my son who I lost and couldn't protect and blamed myself for decades, and the relationship that ended with his father. I've carried those attachments and those losses into everything that came after. And somewhere along the way, my nervous system quietly learned that love comes with a cost. So the arrival of something new to love, something small and alive and completely dependent on me and absolutely chaotic and holy crap, I need sleep, doesn't always feel like pure joy. It feels like joy with a shadow behind it. And I look at her and it makes me so sad that that's how I feel, but that's the truth of it. It's this foreknowledge of eventual loss right there from the beginning. And that's grief trying to protect me from the next time. It means well. It's not helpful, but it means well. But what I keep coming back to, Trixie was worth it. Every bit of grief I'm carrying right now is just evidence of what she was worth. And Micah is worth it. And Parks, currently asleep on something she absolutely should not be asleep on, probably is worth it. The alternative, love less and hold looser and maintain a safe emotional distance from anything that might leave, isn't actually protection. It's just a slower disappearing. It's a smaller life. I don't want a smaller life. I would rather live completely and grieve completely than protect myself into something that doesn't hurt, but also doesn't feel like anything. Fair warning, this list is incomplete because I don't have this figured out. I was going to tell you about what actually helps. It's nonlinear because healing doesn't happen in order. I find that offensive as well, but I've had to accept it. And it's honest, which means some of it is small and unglamorous and it would make a terrible Instagram post. So name it at full size. Not I've been a little off lately, not I just need to get out of my head. The actual full size, the real accumulation, said out loud or written down or spoken into a microphone at whatever hour you can finally get it out. When you put language on the shapeless thing, it doesn't shrink it, but it gives it edges, and things with edges can be carried. Shapeless things just swallow you whole, and you wonder why you feel so heavy. Another one is let yourself be witnessed. This is the hard one for me personally because I'm so much better at witnessing other people than I am at being witnessed myself. I'm excellent at holding space for other people's pain and extremely awkward about my own. This podcast has been a wild experience for me because I am not a talker, but put me in this empty space and put a microphone in front of me and I can talk, apparently. And I can even talk about me and my own shit, apparently. There's a real physiological reason why being seen by another person matters, and it's called co-regulation, and your nervous system in the presence of a calm other can actually sync up to that calm. So borrow it. That's why the right conversation at the right moment does more than an hour of solo journaling. So find those people, let them see the actual size of it. Move your body in ways that don't feel like punishment. I'm not talking about earning your calories or burning off feelings or performing wellness for an audience. Like rhythmic bilateral movement, walking, swimming, anything that crosses the midline of your body helps your brain hemispheres actually communicate with each other and helps your body discharge what your mind can't fully process on its own. It doesn't have to be impressive and it doesn't have to be long. It just has to happen. Okay. Lower the bar for what counts as okay. So my internal metric for doing well had been set at a place I couldn't reach anymore. And because I couldn't reach it, I kept concluding I wasn't doing well. What if okay right now just means I got through today? I said the true thing instead of the quiet thing, or I loved the cat even knowing what loving costs. I made the episode even though I almost didn't. What if that's enough? What if that's actually quite a lot, right? I'm working on believing that. Some days I'm closer than others. Today's a medium day. I'll take it. I want to end with my mom because that's really where this started, even before I had words for any of it. Before cumulative grief and ambiguous loss and window of tolerance and trauma-primed threat response, and before any of the frameworks, before all of that, there was just this. I'm watching my mom disappear, a little at a time. There's no schedule. There's no prognosis that points anywhere hopeful. As I said, there's no moment I can circle on a calendar and say, here, this is when it ends. This is when I'll be allowed to grieve completely. Every day is a goodbye. It's not a final one. It's just another one in a series that doesn't have a last chapter I can see from here. I don't know how to do this. And I want to be honest about that. I have some credentials and research and the lived experience and the microphone, and I genuinely do not know how to grieve someone who is still alive and still present enough to make the grief feel premature, who will never get better and is not yet gone. Nobody teaches you that. There's no class, no support group. There's no book. There's no framework that fully covers the particular experience of loving someone through their own disappearance in real time. And what I've found, not a solution, just a practice, is that I try to grieve the day, not the whole loss. Not the entire arc of where this is going, because that's just too large and I can't hold it. Just today's version of it, today's goodbye, the specific small thing that was different or harder or more absent than yesterday, because that I can kind of hang on to, right? Today's piece I can name and I can feel it and I can set it down at the end of the day and pick it up again tomorrow in whatever form it comes, right? Maybe that's some kind of wisdom. Maybe it's just some kind of survival. I don't know. Maybe there's no difference between the two. I have no clue. We're not broken because we're struggling. We have a nervous system doing its absolute best under conditions it was never designed to sustain for this long. And I think the struggling is evidence of how much we've all kind of been carrying and for how long. That's it. Naming the weight is the first act of survival. I think that shapeless thing swallows you. The named thing can be carried and thrown against a brick wall or something. I don't know. Your grief is real, whether or not it comes with a funeral. Your mourning is valid, whether or not anyone brings you a friggin' casserole. I like potatoes, by the way. I'm just kidding. Gratitude and struggle can live in the same house. You don't have to choose between them. You don't have to feel guilty about either one. You've survived every single loss you are certain would end you. Every one. Every damn one. You said you couldn't, and then you did. That's your evidence written in your own history, and that belongs to you. Loving things that can leave is not a flaw in your design. It's the whole damn point of being a human being. The grief is just the love with nowhere to go. I hate that quote. But there it is. And the cracks, every single one of them can be filled with gold. Don't forget that. Kintsukuroi. That's what you are. That's what I am. Very cracked, very filled, and very shiny. I almost didn't do this episode. I told my husband I should just keep my mouth shut. That I obviously needed to do better with my attitude. I actually said that. I said that. I just need to do better with my attitude. As if all these years of work and every book I've ever written and every person I've ever sat with in their hardest moments somehow doesn't apply to me. As if I was just like the one person for whom the answer was just attitude adjustment. I don't know. I tried to give voices to people who no longer have one, murder victims, cold case does, people whose stories were buried or dismissed or simply never told. I sat with Kayla's mother. I've honored people. I've made it my life's work to say this person existed, this story matters, this deserves to be heard. And I'm a person and my story deserves to be heard too, even when it's messy or when it doesn't resolve. Even when the most honest thing I can offer is I don't have this figured out and I'm tired and normal feels shady as fuck and I have a very shiny heart and I'm still here. I don't know. The immovable thing is still immovable. The daily goodbyes continue. Micah's doing better today. Had her at the vet a little bit earlier and, we're just waiting on some stuff, but I don't know. She's doing better and I've decided to call that a good sign. I'm calling it good sign. Done. Parks is probably tearing apart my house and pissing off Micah and I don't know. I love her anyway. I love all of them anyway. That's the decision I keep making. It's the only one I know how to make and I don't care if everyone at my vet clinic thinks I'm nuts. I don't care if I look like a crazy lady. I just don't. If this found you at the right moment, if something in it named a thing you've been carrying with that language, I'm really glad because that's why I do this. That's why I want to do this. These real talk episodes, where I just I'm just real and raw with you. It's not because I have the answers, because I often don't, but I have the microphone and you have your ears, and that means neither of us is doing this completely alone, right? So take care of yourselves. Let someone take care of you if you can or if you need it, and I will see you next time.
You've been listening to Unbound Off Script. We know these aren't always easy places to go, and we appreciate you being here with Beth Curry as she stumbles through the things that matter most. If you have something on your heart that you'd like her to speak to, we're here. Contact info is in the show notes. Until next time, be good to yourself and others.